Welcome to another episode of Unconditioned Mind. Unconditioned Mind is a project of Awakened Global. And our focus there is a movement that focuses to contribute towards gender and racial inequality. I have an exciting guest today, Professor Langa, Malose Langa, who's going to be talking about gender inequality. So, Prof, maybe you can start by introducing yourself, tell us about your book, and what you do.
Okay, thanks very much, Mamnuku, for a warm welcome. It's an honor to be part of this exciting podcast. I'm Professor Malose Langa from the Department of Psychology at Wits University, but I also work as an associate researcher at the Center for Study of Violence and Reconciliation. So in brief, I've been working at the university for the last 20 years, and with the center that I've mentioned, I've also been with them for quite some time, more than 16 years, researching issues of violence and trauma, with specific focus on issues of boys and men, and that's how the book Becoming Men was written. But a brief story to the book is that obviously as a young person back then, because obviously one is growing older, and if I were to be specific, it was around 2003, 2004, where I was working in one of the South African prisons as a psychologist. And of course, what amazed me during that period, I saw very many young people, of course, serving all kinds of sentences, and I started talking to them about what may have led them to be in prison. And one of the issues that many of them raised was the issue of growing up without fathers in their own personal lives, and also the issue of manhood, and the issue of peer pressure, and male peer pressure, to be quite specific. And of course, I was taken aback, to say if these are the three main factors that are being mentioned by almost 90 to 95% of young inmates, it means there's a problem.
Yes.
Is there anything that can be done? And of course, by then, they're already serving long sentences. I then went back, started talking to people, and of course, the issue of townships were mentioned, say, sort of as a breeding ground. And I said, okay, I'll go to one of the townships. And I went to Alexandra, township. It's a well-known, township. Randomly met a group of, young boys. And at that time, I was like, no, look, I want to talk to very, very young boys. And of course, I started talking to boys between the age of 10 and 12. And obviously, these are still preteens. And I started talking to them about what it meant to be a boy, and they started talking to me, and they always say, the rest is a history. And I traced these boys over a period of 12 years. By the time I concluded the research project, many of them were above the age of 20, mm-hmm. And in fact some were fathers themselves.
Wow.
So yeah, so I think that gave me a better insight about issues of fatherhood, issues of boyhood, issues of manhood, and I guess issues of gender, of what it means to be a male person.
Yeah, I suppose we all very conscious of the mental issues around boys, around men, and from your research, from the book and your general research, maybe you can just tell us about that aspect and what we found in your research, especially around these boys that we're talking about.
Yeah. Obviously, which is a well-known fact, the stats by SADC, the South African Depression Anxiety Group, clearly show that mental health problems are a big problem. And the most common one, obviously, is the depression, is anxiety, is trauma, is substance abuse. Mm-hmm. And then if we were to think about those four in relation to boys and men, depression is extremely high amongst men. The issue of like, suicide, which is linked with like, depression, is very high. And the issue of trauma, it's also very high. And the issue of substance abuse, everyone knows it's a big, big problem.
Yes.
But the major difference, as compared, if I were to get into like, gender differences, is that with boys, given the boy code, given the manhood like, code, it's quite difficult for them to openly say, I'm depressed.
Mm-hmm.
It is quite difficult for them to say, I'm feeling anxious. It is quite difficult, I guess, like, for them to say, I was traumatized by this, like, event.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously the mental health, like, problems come out, like, quite indirectly. They come in a form of aggression. They come out in a form of, like, violence. They come, the one that we know, that we are all of us able to see, is substance, like, abuse.
Mm-hmm.
But also with it is normalized. It is seen as a sign of being like a man. We don't interrogate, why is this boy, why is this man drinking, like, excessively.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that it's used as a way of, I guess, like, numbing, like, the pain, numbing the depression, numbing the anxiety, but it is sort of like, seen as the norm. In fact, those that do not drink, you're seen as like, you're missing out.
Mm-hmm.
So you need
you're
to,
a sissy.
Yeah, you need to show that you're a real man. And the real man is that, in fact, if you take your side ass, I mean, to get teased, to get mocked. So the issue of mental health and men and boys, it is something that it is of a concern. And I'm of the view, to say, if we're to begin to start dealing with some of the social ills, in fact, that has to be the starting point. And slowly, obviously, some boys and men there and there, though the numbers are still very small, they're slowly, like, opening up, to say, look, chief, I'm not, like, coping, I need help. And obviously the issue of access is still a big problem. But I think it's a movement that we need to sort of, like, start and try and encourage, to say, in fact, real boys, real men seek help. Real boys, real men, when they're struggling, they speak out. And when we normalize that, it will become very easy, for them to come out. So that we don't then get a phone call, to say, Usia has hanged, like, himself. The issue of, like, suicide, it's a big, like, problem.
Sure.
So they don't, I guess, ideate, where one is, like, thinking, they act. And the act, obviously, more often they hang themselves. If they have access to guns, they shoot themselves, and some of lately, they shoot everyone in the family and they shoot, like, themselves. But then it's too late.
Yes. So let's just talk about this whole issue of fatherlessness, because these things we've seen even in our own families. I mean, I know that my nephews, for instance, who had absent fathers, and the impact that it had on them in terms of their mental health and their lives generally, they get nowhere in terms of they don't finish their education, they substance abuse and all of that. Even my own children, although I was a strong parent who was present and there, but the fact that the father was not there had a huge impact on them in terms of, just this dealing with this issue that you grew up without a father became a big theme of their lives. So just talk to us about this impact of fatherlessness and what it does to these young boys.
I mean, the fact is that fatherlessness it's a big problem in this, like, country. We have just, like, released like a report entitled "The State of, like, Fatherhood" in South Africa. So obviously we release these reports every 2 years. So there's the 2018 edition, there's the 2021 edition. We're working on the third, like, edition now. And obviously both editions, I mean, all of them confirm that the issue of fatherlessness is a big problem. Where, I mean, in terms of the stats, is that more than 60 to almost 70 children in this country are growing without fathers.
That's a high, eh?
Yeah. So if you're to think about that, the impact we see it in terms of some of the problems that we've mentioned, where obviously many boys grow up with a lot of questions, and questions which are not able to be answered, and of course that has been linked, especially when they're very young, with poor school performance, all kinds of behavioral problems. And when we begin to sort of explore, is that many of them are linked with the fact that why is my father not here? And remember, fathers are absent in different forms, okay? In different forms. And if I were to share some of the forms, is that you may have a father who's living in the household, he's there physically, he's providing, he has a lot of money, but emotionally he's absent. So you also have that group of children where fathers are there, but emotionally absent. But you also have absent where maybe the father has passed on, and obviously for each absent, it evokes all kinds of feelings. But also he may have been late, but also when he was alive, he was sort of absent. It raises a lot of questions. And you have those that are denying that I'm not your father, and even when paternity results show that you're my dad, he keeps on rejecting you. Okay. And then you also have those that come and go and sort of disappear. One day they're here, next day they're nowhere to be sort of found. Quite inconsistent. And also have those, which is a new phenomenon, where they are pushing to be sort of present, but they're being alienated. And obviously being alienated by their partners. And this happens more often when the relationship has gone south. The relationship has ended, and obviously then kids are being used as a pawn, and the alienation, unfortunately, at times it's something that gets done, by women, saying I'm going to use kids as a way of punishing you. And of course, some they try and go through court systems, but we know at times that takes not very long. But the fact is that many children are growing up without fathers, and it has a very negative impact. And I guess it creates also the cycle, where suddenly you've grown, because the other study that my other colleague Prof. Gobodo did was the fatherlessness of the fathers, that sort of it is intergenerational, where it runs. I've never had a father, and then I've no role model, someone that I can sort of use as an example, to rely on. And of course, it leaves me with a pain, and then the pain that gets played out in my relationship with my own children, and then this cycle sort of continues. And that's what we are sitting with, despite the fact that slowly, and I think also that this is worth mentioning, that slowly through some of these reports, what we're beginning to see is that, look, black men have taken a decision, especially men in your early 30s, early 40s, are slowly saying, even though the relationship may have broken, I'm not going to leave my kids, and we have good examples where young people are able to co-parent, because also with other women have a recognition to say, okay, our relationship, our marriage may have ended, but I'm not going to alienate, you need to play the part, and in fact the force, and that's very, very beautiful. We have such good cases where young black men are standing up and are getting involved in raising their children. So I guess some of these positive examples is what these reports are also trying to bring to the fore. Even with the recent court ruling about extending the paternity leave, to sort of fathers. It's a good recognition, even from a legal sort of point of view. To say in the past, in fact, at some point, there were no paternity leave days. And then we had 3, we increased 3 to 10. And now we are saying they must be entitled, to sort of like 4 months. And the jury's still out, with the recent report, what we did with the 10 days, we did a survey where we then asked men who have taken the leave, because then concerns were being raised, to say, when they take a leave, what is that they do with those leave days? There are those that are saying, no, I'm at home, I'm making sure that I'm taking care of things. Obviously, my partner is still in pain, and I'm doing household duties. But of course, there'll be cases where others is like, it's my time, to go to the beer hall and sort of have fun.
Okay, all right, Prof. Let's just go to this big topic of patriarchy, manhood, masculinity. That is a big topic in South Africa. Just impacting society in all sorts of ways. In terms of gender inequality and the impact of all of that on society. Just unpack these concepts for us, what they mean, what their impact is, and so on.
I mean, obviously, yes, it's three terms. I mean, it's patriarchy, it's manhood, it's masculinity. And at a face value, it may be as if they're the same, but they're not, but they're interrelated. So patriarchy, obviously, others say it's a system. It's a system of power. At the center of this system, it's about power, it's about control, it's about authority. And obviously, more often, it's about power over women and other groups. In other groups, it is men that are considered not to be men enough. And obviously they get pushed onto the margins. But the masculinity part of it, it's about, I guess, characteristics, or one can say behaviors associated with being a male, a person. And that's when the manhood, the state of being a man. Okay. So obviously South Africa, with many other countries, I mean, it has a very strong patriarchal sort of system. And the system it's national, and you see it in different institutions. It could be in schools, it could be in homes, it could be in churches, it could be in work places. It is as if there's a head office somewhere, where it's okay, but it functions very well. It is highly entrenched. Okay, and it's a very strong system. So when I say as if there's a head office, it is as if now and then there's a board meeting, to say how are things working, and there's an update. None of that. Okay, and what is very interesting, it runs across different cultures. It runs across different racial groups, and in almost the same way. Of course, there'll be differences, in terms of how factors such as class, race, mediate, the system. Okay, so it's a very powerful sort of system. But then what we started sort of seeing with masculinity, behaviors associated with men, because all of us then need to comply with this bigger sort of system. And other men started saying, hell no, because we pay a heavy price. Then we started realizing that this system kills. This system kills, and it kills in this way, because you need to comply. And part of the compliance is that as a young boy growing up in Heideveld, let's say in Cape Flats, part of, for you to show that you're a real man, you need to belong to a gang.
Wow.
Okay? So obviously you die as a result of that. And then it is that system that kills you. Like we have mentioned earlier on. I'm struggling emotionally. Can I then come and cry and say, look, I'm not holding up? The system says, no, you're not allowed, because this amount's being too weak. Okay? So you die as a result of that. You die emotionally. You get dissociated from your own humanity, as a person. And then with that recognition is that then others started defying the system, to say, I'm not going to be party to this. I'm going to embrace something that is different, that is unique, that is alternative. Okay, but obviously you then get seen as a traitor, because then you still get called all kinds of names. And that's what you see in the book, where these boys, of course, many of them grew up without fathers, but with the messages, including this podcast, because people are going to watch it and say, I can still be different, I can still be unique. And they begin to then realize, to say there are new messages now.
Okay.
And with this, then they begin to say, no, I don't need to prove to anyone. It doesn't mean that because I'm from LX, this is what I need to do. It doesn't mean because I'm from Kwamashu, I need to do this. I need to belittle women. I need to rape. I need to be violent. I need to belong to a gang. And they begin to embrace something that is different, that is non-violent in nature, that is pro-gender equity. To say, if we are at home, if I can do chores, I'll do chores. If I can cook, I'll cook. And then, obviously, it's not that the system is sort of falling, but that's what we're beginning to sort of see. And with the colleagues, through media now, is that Malose and many others that are researching these issues, how then do we begin to propagate these messages? So if this was not part of my agenda, Mamnuko, I would not have come here.
Okay.
To have this conversation with you, because I know there will be 2 or 3 people that are going to be changed through this sort of podcast.
Yes.
As a way of we need to begin to tamper with the system and tamper with the system and tamper with the system. And then what we're beginning to see is that others are beginning to accommodate these gender changes that we're talking about, these messages of gender, equity. Though they are accommodating, they still draw some dividends from the bigger system.
Yes.
They still draw. It's not because they don't get the rewards, the dividends, if you were to speak that language. They still continue to accrue. But then what we are saying is that we need to keep on pushing, because slowly, with our research, with our reports, we are beginning to see some shifts. And of course, these shifts are not very big, to a point where they're making the system fall. But maybe the next generation, in some centuries to come, they will reap what you and I are sowing now.
But, this system is supported by the defined roles for men and women, which may have worked before. I'm not a scholar like yourself. I don't really care about the research of how the whole thing started. The reality of the situation now in 2023, that whatever definition of those roles is no longer working for society. And so I just look at these roles that said the man must provide and the woman must take care, caregiving and domestic work and things like that. And imagine the kind of pressure that is on the man who now has to take care of this family and provide for this family when they can't. Maybe they lose a job or they can't find a job, or you are in a marriage or partnership, a relationship where, for instance, the wife is more talented than you and has bigger positions, earning more than you, but they are still stuck in these roles that have been defined by society, and the more brokenness that is being caused by these definitions. Just talk to us about that.
I also like the way you sort of started, to say, I'm not a researcher, these things, but the fact, because there are people that say, no, there's roles worked and everything, okay? And obviously would not want to go the archival sort of route if whether they've worked or not. But in terms of the here and now, and linking it with the systems, when I said the system, you find it almost everywhere. You find it in the home, in the school, and and a lot of examples in workplaces can be given. But let's use the home as an example. where many of us were told, to say, if you're a boy, what you need to do is to head, sheep and goats and cattle, okay? And umamno would do the household sort of like duties. And at times you feel like, I want to be party to this and play this and everything. And then now and then the mother will say, look, you can't. Okay. And of course, this is what we see, like, in creches, this is what you see in primary schools, this is what we see in schools, and so on and so forth. Okay. But now we have enough evidence, to say this is causing problems. And it's causing problems in this way. So my view is that, look, these gender roles have not worked and are not working. And in fact, they've created a lot of problems. Let's take the issue of parenthood, like, for an example, where a lot of men, I guess, like, back then, they saw changing of, like, nappies as something that must be done by their partner. Okay. But in fact, that has denied them the opportunity, to bond, like, with their kids, like, emotionally. And hence some struggle with this, to say, but guys, I've taken you to the best schools, I've done, like, almost like, everything. But here you are, you feel like I was this, like, monster. You're a monster, because you're just, like, there. But I don't feel any attachment, towards, like, you. And you are sort of, like, surprised. And when I turn the coin the other way, it is when, obviously, then I have this burden that I carry. And others will say the burden of the phallus, the fact that you're a male person, there's this burden that you carry. And we've seen it even with our forefathers and our fathers, where they had this burden that they had to live up to, they need to provide, because now there's this image that gets created as if fathers back then were able to do. They had to mask it as if they were able to do. Hence, comrade, at some point during our anti-apartheid, like, struggle, they had to go and trash the beer halls, because this is where men were taking out their pain and hurt, in an unhealthy way. And hence now even stories of, like, abuse are coming out, where it is as if it was not there, it was there, but it was hidden. And now we're making things, like, more public, saying, I'm not able to afford. And if I'm not able to afford, will I still be seen as a father? And our report then shows, to say, with the survey that we did with this 1,000, like, men as part of the state of, like, fatherhood report, out of the sample of those that were not present in their children's life, none of them, which was very interesting, none of them were saying, no, I don't want to. The ones that did not have access were being denied. And when we checked the reasons, it's because they were not able to provide. And again, it's about how we see the role, in this case, of, like, a father. It must be someone who's able to do this and do this. And then you don't meet, like, the criteria. So obviously, even in work, like, places where now you may work in a company where your boss is a female, like, person. But again, we also have female sort of, like, bosses. I'm sure you can talk more to this sort of, like, point, like, around how you're expected to sort of, like, be a boss as compared to, like, your male, like, counterpart. Because you, as a female, like, boss, you must be a nice person. You must be soft. You must show nurturance. You must care. And if you don't, you are Margaret Thatcher. You're an iron lady. You get called, like, all kinds of, like, names. And names which are very derogatory, like, in nature. But the male boss is not subjected, like, to the same sort of, standard. And these are things that we need to definitely start nipping them in the bud. But you cannot nip them in the bud when we are at a workplace. But in the home, the practice is different. In the school, the practice is different. Because that's what is happening, like, currently. And hence now, some young men are now coming back, to say, Malose and your colleagues who have spoken, we are part of the movement. Like you're saying the other day, to say a movement, it means this, it means this. It's not an organization. Okay. We are part of the movement wherever I am. But I find this very confusing, because I bought into this, like, movement. I'm at home, I'm trying to be present, I'm trying to be this. And then my partner is like, no, man, why don't you go and be with the guys and do what the guys do and start like, fighting with me, like, in the house or over this and over this. What's this? Because I thought this is the way to go. And it's because what we have done, and which I guess it is part of change, that when you press this, other things do not get pressed in the way in which you would want them to be pressed. That what is happening, other systems are changing and other systems are resisting, like, the change. And then hence now there's a feeling that where people say maybe things were better back then, because now there's so much pushback and it feels as if there's a tension. But we're saying maybe this tension ultimately will bring sort of like no change.
I mean, the sad thing for me is that we're all socialized by the system, both men and women.
Yeah.
And we're all sort of conditioned to play these roles.
Yeah.
Women carry this burden, feel guilty when they can't do it effectively because they've been socialized to believe that it is their role. And men also have been socialized to believe that you are the provider.
Yeah.
And I must say that there is that situation where when the man cannot provide, he loses his stature in the family.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, he also feels bad, but even in the family, he loses his respect from the wife, from the children, who are always going to mom for things because the father cannot provide. Yeah. But for me, I mean, the sad thing is how a whole society was designed to fit into these roles, right? And now in this era where women are working, they are now carrying the burden for caregiving and domestic work, while the men are enjoying the benefit of being helped to support, right? And they don't feel guilty that they're being helped to support. And they don't see the necessity of finding that equity and balance in the home, helping now with this caregiving and domestic work. And as you said, for instance, the fact that men were conditioned to believe that they are not nurturers is so sad for me, because we are living in a broken society, because men are not able to express love to their children. Yeah. And now there's this cycle of brokenness because of that. Now, I'm saying all these roles are skills that anybody can learn, right? Women are good now in business because they've been trained. And men do not see the need of getting training in the other roles. You'll hear men saying, no, I'll never cook. Cooking is for women, or I'll never do chores or take care of babies or anything like that. And so what can be done then to fast track this demolition of these roles and this system? And we cannot continue to burden women with these responsibilities, because I know with myself, for instance, I was a top executive, but at home I was expected to be the traditional wife. At the end of the day, I was exhausted, totally exhausted of trying to be, this superwoman who can do all of this thing. And you hear of women committing suicide too, because this pressure is just too much. You've got this pressure at work to perform at your best, and you've got this pressure at home to still be expected to perform as if, we don't care if you work. We still expect you to give, unpaid domestic work and caregiving work. What can be done, Prof?
Yeah, I mean, Mamno, it is as if there's a gender war. And in fact, it's not supposed to be the case. But the way we're also managing this part of the conversation, in which I hope through this we'll do something opposite. It is as if there's like a gender war, where I guess with the comments that you made, it's like there's, in fact, it's supposed to be the opposite of that. Where there's a recognition, the recognition that these roles are not working for both of us. And in fact, we need each other. Let's abolish them. And I think the way you put it, it's quite beautiful. This is not working for us. Like if I get to what you said about, like, Abu Mama. I mean, the notion of like motherhood is a big thing. A mother sacrifices, a mother does this and does this and does this and does this. Then you can imagine if you're not able to live up to those images of a good mother. There's paper that I wrote, to be or not to be a mother. I engage with some of those discourses, and to be, it comes at a cost and at a cost. And we then extended that, saying, let's talk to women that are working. It's exactly what you're saying, and all of them are talking about the balance, and the balance that they're not able to sort of maintain, and the guilt that you feel that I was not able to go to my child's school function. I was not able to do this, and I was not able to do this. But what we need to do, for me, at the end, is that if we don't start, and unfortunately I'm going to say this, it may sound very conservative, but if we don't start in the home, this battle is going to be lost. If we don't start as we are sitting as a grandmother now, where you see your niece or your nephew or behaving in a way in which they perpetuate this gender roles, you and I, this will just be an intellectual conversation. Those are things that we need to call out when we are at the preschool meeting, where your granddaughter or whoever is there, to say, we can't be doing this. You should be saying to your daughter, no, you can't. You should be saying to your son, no, you can't. So if you and I and many other people commit to doing that in our own sort of spaces as part of the movement, it will sort of grow. I was quite impressed with few young boys that I've seen, the age of 6 and 7 and 8, because I like them young. I like talking to them when they're young. And I asked this one boy, not very long, a few weeks ago, I think it's 2 weeks ago. And I was asking him about bullying at school, whether he's being bullied or not. And he said, no, I'm not being bullied. And I said, if you were to be bullied, what would you do? The way he sort of explained, I was like, though his story will not make a headline, I was quite impressed, saying, oh, first of all, I'll do this and do this. I'll talk to the teacher and I'll explain, but I'll also confront the bully and say to him, this is not right.
Wow.
And explain to him, and he sort of but ultimately show the bully that this is not a way to be. And because I'm naughty, I kept on saying, but that's how boys behave. And he said, no, that's not true. It is a lie that boys need to behave in this way. Of course, I tried to push boundaries of saying, so what if it's a girl? Are other boys not going to laugh at you? No, they can laugh. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to react violently. Wow. Because she's a girl. I'll still follow the same process of reporting her and doing this and doing nothing violent. So when you see that, is that there are pockets of this and pockets of this. And what you need to do is to erase, because also is the scripture that many of our people draw on. The scripture is very toxic. The scripture is very negative. The scripture, it is not building anything new.
So, you're right. It has to start at home. And once I recognize this, I began to make sure that it doesn't happen in my own household. And I've seen the impact of that in the way both my girls, my girl and my two boys behave.
Yeah.
But Prof, there's this issue of the ego.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not professional in terms of the right terminology, psychology in terms of psychology, but there's this issue of the male ego and the woman ego, right? Yeah. And they may manifest themselves differently. Yeah. Just talk to us about this construct of the male ego and how the woman then responds. Because, I mean, I look at myself that at work, I was able to be a tough businesswoman, I wouldn't allow anybody to bully me, and I earned my respect. Yeah. But at home, I was this traditional wife who was trying to fit into, what my elders say a woman behaves. And I've reflected on this. Why was that? Why didn't I see through this myth, for instance, of this is how I need to behave? And I realized that I didn't want to be labeled. Yeah. And therefore, for my own safety and security, I wanted to fit in and look like I'm the good wife, I'm the good mother that I'm supposed to be. So sort of enabling this system, sort of allowing this system also so that, I don't upset my elders and things like that. Yeah. So just talk to us about the role of this male ego in all of this.
Let's link things. I mean, there's something that you said earlier on, like around the skills that we can all learn. I think that for me was quite profound in answering the issue of male ego. And I guess when you said the skills that all of us can learn, it means those skills are non-gendered, have no gender written on them, And then it goes, because I want to come back, to the male ego, because basically that points, it shows that these are things that we learn. We are socialized, as we were talking earlier on. So what that has created, the myth, it has created this myth that this is like a birthright, a birthright, to occupy a particular position. And then, in fact, you are not entitled, to be in this position. But of course, now one can even go in terms of the law, all this laws that we had to sort of enact to enable, I guess, women to also enter into sort of spaces. But then the male ego, if I were to sort of simply define it, we may say men, but in fact we even say it with very young boys, where there's a sense of entitlement. I'm entitled to this.